bill's much shorter. So Devin, why don't do you want to go up to the table like you did yesterday, or do you want to sit right there?
I can sit right here.
Okay. Okay, we're again on Senate Bill 909 from Senator Hester.
Senate Bill 909, Energy Resource Adequacy and Planning Act. So I promise this will not be 2 hours. The first thing I would say is that as we sit here right now, again, like yesterday, the House and Senate bills are identical. These amendments to this bill, you have a reprint in front of you. These amendments were worked on by stakeholders, including and led by the Public Service Commission. So the bill establishes, what does the bill do? The bill establishes the strategic.
Can I just, we have the PSC here, right? So why don't you come up to, why don't you guys come up to the table in case some questions pop up, okay? Thanks.
So the bill establishes the Strategic Energy Planning Office as an independent office similar to the Public Service Commission, but closer in mirroring the Office of People's Counsel in its structure. And we'll walk through the bill very quickly. So beginning on page 1 through page 5, it establishes the office and, as I said, mirrors the provisions for the Public Service Commission and the Office of People's Counsel for funding and staffing. So it has the exact same provisions for this office that it would have for the Office of People's Counsel and the Public Service Commission. If you go to page 6, page 6 establishes the director of the office in the term of the director's office. That term is 5 years. The director is appointed by the governor with advice and consent of the Senate. The director who is appointed after a term has begun shall serve the rest of the term until a successor is appointed. A director also may serve more than one term. The governor may remove the director for incompetence or misconduct in office and entitled to a salary as provided in the state budget. So page 7 begins the parts of the bill that delineate what the office is to do. So page 7, the office, in order to carry out the requirements of this bill, the office shall collaborate with the Maryland Energy Administration, the Public Service Commission, the Power Plant Research Program, the Maryland Clean Energy Center, and the Department of the Environment. What does the office do? So the office is required every 3 years to develop a comprehensive wholesale energy markets and bulk power system risk report. The purpose of that report is to assess wholesale energy market financial resource adequacy and reliability risks associated with serving the state's long-term energy needs, and identify any necessary cost-effective solutions that ensure electric system reliability while meeting the state energy policy goals. The solutions identified in this risk report shall seek to minimize the growth of the cost of electricity or lower the cost of electricity, minimize energy resource reliability risks, and then the risk report shall include energy and demand forecasts that contain reasonable 20-year projections for electricity load and energy demands for both transmission zones and electric service territories. Also having projections for meeting the state's energy needs and clean energy goals and load forecast in the PJM region, including low, average, and high projections of energy demand and other projections as necessary. If you turn to page 8, continue on page 8, it says that the office, in collecting the data, the office should, but is not required to use historical and projected information from electric companies, load forecasts from the PJM region, appropriate economic metric data from the state, and any other information the office considers appropriate. So those are optional for the office to consider. Sub C, office shall examine different wholesale energy markets and bulk power system scenarios to serve the forecast under this section above. And each of these scenarios are required to identify the resulting wholesale energy market and bulk power system financial and resource adequacy impacts of serving the forecast within the existing electric system, known additions to the electric system, and any electric system resource retirements. Also, to identify resource and demand side management solutions, and for a subset of the scenarios that are primarily relied on within the risk report, the office shall, in addition to these requirements, also identify the resulting wholesale market and bulk power system reliability impacts of serving the forecast within the existing electric system. Again, known additions to the electric system and electric system resource requirements. So what's going to happen with the resulting wholesale market and the bulk power systems associated with this report? This report would be able to give that to us. So purpose and solutions, and I'm talking about scenarios that will be studied, and so we go to page 9 and talk about what the scenarios are. So it's actually beginning on page 8, sub 5. Scenarios required under this shall include at least one scenario that examines the achievement of the state clean energy goals. So they have to do a scenario that says, okay, what do we need for our clean energy goals? They have to do a scenario that examines a least cost approach, and that's important, a least cost approach to meeting state's projected energy needs. So that's separate from any goals established by the state and by the policies that you all have put forth. So it's and then the business as usual model that is contained in any scenario studies that has happened. So that's at least one scenario that assumes no changes in state energy or climate policies. And in addition, the risk report will be informed by the forecasts and scenarios that are here. So we're putting together all these scenarios. We're putting together all these forecasts. What are we going to do? We're going to take it, and this office is going to create a risk report associated with that, providing the information on the risks associated with serving the identified energy forecasts and or achieving the state's clean energy goals. What's the financial impacts? We're going to discuss that in this report. What's the resource adequacy, financial, and reliability risks of the wholesale energy markets and bulk power scenarios? And so the impacts and risks associated with it. And then the report will specify the inputs and assumptions used in developing the risk report. So sub 2 says that the shall include any recommendations of the office regarding short and long term. So we're talking about recommendations for the office now and through the report. What are your recommendations regarding short and long-term solutions to minimize wholesale energy market and bulk power system financial resource adequacy and reliability risks? So you get the scenarios, you put together, you get the forecast, and now the report has to make recommendations regarding what are solutions associated with the risks and the forecast identified earlier. Those recommendations may include energy generation, transmission, or distribution resource deployment, or demand-side management solutions. We talked a little bit just about energy efficiency there at one of the last bill hearings, and that would be a management solution for the demand side, providing more energy efficiency. Program development, including altering or adding to existing programs, proposing new programs, or statutory or regulatory changes. Also, recommendations to the General Assembly to implement these short and long-term recommendations, including utilizing existing or creating new markets, creating new state programs, state financing options, electric company procurement of programs. I'm on page 10 now, examining the mix of in-state generation versus relying on imports and demand-side management, and any other recommendations that the office considers. The office shall support the recommendations and analysis that balance the affordability, reliability, and greenhouse gas reductions. If the office identifies that these risks are acceptable, that's what they may be able to recommend, or they may recommend no action to be taken. 71204, again, this is what does the office need to develop this policy and develop this report. The office will develop and maintain all of the tools and resources necessary to complete the analyses. So think of forecasting data or web-based programs, anything like that that they need to be able to support the data. Coordinate with PJM to develop and maintain those tools that PJM may have to complete the analysis required here. Have the ability to conduct cost-benefit analyses of energy generation, provide an opportunity for stakeholder feedback, and for the risk report under this section, the office shall conduct a stakeholder process, receiving that stakeholder feedback regarding development of data inputs that would inform the forecast for developing the risk report. However, the office is not required to utilize the feedback received from the stakeholder process conducted here, but will provide documentation to the report of all of the stakeholder information that has been provided by the stakeholders. In addition to public hearings required under here, after the risk report gets published, the office will conduct a stakeholder process to develop the report that assesses the strategies identified in that report, the risks and recommendations that the office makes. When assessing those strategies here, again, the office will consider new existing programs, leveraging technology enhancements, revised regulatory structures, important, we've talked about that earlier in some other bills, state coordination of federal solutions, utilizing market mechanisms, and then any other factors considered appropriate. If you go to page 11, it talks about what's the report, what's going to happen. So the office, in consultation with MEA, the Maryland Energy Administration, shall complete the energy modeling for the risk report. So that's a partnership with the Maryland Energy Administration. And then on or before November 1 each year, this committee and the House Economic Matters Committee may actually jointly request the office to assess additional policy scenarios. Not later than 1 year after that date, the office, if the office receives those requests from the General Assembly, the office will submit a report on the results of that. Okay, what happens when we get this report? This is going to be a great thing. What do we do? So as I said at the beginning, this is a 3-year report. So on or before September 1, 2028, and every 3 years thereafter, I'm sorry, I'm on page 11, the office shall submit the risk report to the governor and the General Assembly, and the office may provide updates to that report at any time. So the office is not limited to the 3-year cycle. The office can, if something magical happens, the office can report back to the governor and the General Assembly on that magic. The updates shall include the status and any changes to the forecasts and scenarios, information on any new forecasts or any other changes to the information or recommendations. And on or before September 1, 2028, and every 3 years after, the office shall submit to the governor the report required. So why is that important? Because what's going to happen over the first 3 years is that office is going to create a big report. And so once that big report is created, that is like, it's like the basis for subsequent updates and additions to the report. So it is unlikely that once that big report is completed, that there will be another big report 3 years later, another big report 3 years later. What there will happen will be that office will be updating every 3 years or perhaps sooner to the report as the policy scenarios shift, as the actions that the General Assembly take shift, as the world shifts with regard to energy and energy policy going forward. So at the, I think that's pretty much it. If you go to the last page, page 18, the uncodified language, the uncodified language adds some additional reporting requirements. The Public Service Commission shall study the effectiveness of an independent distribution operator. So the Public Service Commission will be required to study that. The Public Service Commission will then have to submit a report by December 31, 2026. In addition, the Department of Transportation shall study methods for reducing transmission-constrained areas for the use of existing transportation right-of-ways. They also will require to submit that report by December 31st, 2026. And then the last one is the Strategic Planning Office shall submit to the governor and the General Assembly a status update on this development of this report in 2027. So while the office is being stood up, then it's going to start working on that report that's due in 2028, where the General Assembly will receive an update on what the status is in 2027, and that is Senate Bill 909.
Okay, I want to just, before we take questions, I just want to give shout out to Senator Hester, because it became pretty obvious to a lot of us that we lacked a lot of in-house modeling, forecasting capacity. We're going to make these big decisions, and a lot of other states actually have that capacity. So she, I think, single-handedly looked around the country and pulled a lot of, now we've got the PSC involved. Okay, so with that, we had a hearing. The bill's been modified, obviously. So with that, we'll take questions. Yeah, yeah.
You said general fund, But it is special fund?
If I said general fund, I misspoke because I did
It's
not
special
say,
fund.
yes, it's special
Thank you.
funded.
Right.
Yes, no.
It's not a
it's
general
special
fund.
in the Senate.
Okay, so we're going to take questions. We're going to go Senator Gallion, and then we'll go Senator Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just trying to figure how everything kind of fits together. So it kind of reminds me of, when we did the blueprint, and you have the AIB, which is not the MSD. It's like another kind of group. So you get more, I see some similarities there. I guess the question is, I know with so many changes, the fiscal note would be a lot different, I'm assuming. Do we have an idea of what the overall cost will be and how many, pins? Do we have an idea how big this new group is going to be?
Can we, and again, we've got three people here, but I'll yield to our Public Service Commission representative here and tell us, give us your name first.
Yeah, so Ben Baker with the Maryland Public Service Commission. Our office estimated that for this group in the long run, I'm not saying the first year, this is long run as they get stood up. So this is probably a couple of years in the future. It's going to be about 24, maybe a little more, because they are going to need to have administrative staff and modeling teams. Where this is going to be tricky is this kind of expertise is very expensive, and so it might make more sense for them to rely on consultants more in the long run than it is for them to maintain this in-house. But I would say as whoever you hire for this position, I think that's something that they're going to need to figure out within their first year of being here is kind of that trajectory of how they're going to do this. And I would say definitely for your first report, it will probably be done mostly with consultants as they bring bodies on board. Cost, the assessment that we set up, that's the same as OPC's, so I believe that calcs out somewhere around 7 to 8 million. They might need something a little more than that once this is actually full blown. But it's not a cheap. You are hiring some of the best in this sector to do this work. Yeah.
So you mentioned the consultants, and that's what I was thinking of early on. I mean, we're going to be propping up another quasi-government entity here. Why not just go with consultants at a fraction of that cost and not have to have all these extra pins? I'm assuming this is coming from from the budget or through the ratepayer. Where
it'll come through. So how the assessment works, they will be effectively funded similar to us, where it's through the ratepayer bill. But there's always an interaction. So while it's specially funded, there's always an interaction between DBM and our ability to get bodies through the budget process and pins in the state. So the two kind of intersect anyways. So until, effectively in this first year, I think you're likely to be constrained on the number of pins you could give this group anyways.
Was any thought given to, instead of having a whole quasi-government agency here, just going with consultants at probably a fraction of the cost where you don't have to pay the benefits and all that stuff? Was that even thought of?
Go ahead, Ben.
Because you're saying you're going to need consultants to start off. Why do we have to switch to?
And I think that's going to be a direction that you all will have in discussion with this office as they get going. So right now they don't exist. The person who will be their initial director has not been appointed. Right. I really do think as this comes into being, that over that first year, that what you're asking is going to be part of that overall discussion. In terms of there will have to be bodies in this office. I think that should be recognized, but especially for the modeling team, how many of them basically, does it make more sense to go the program manager route and manage consultants, or does it make sense to go full blown, everyone works for the state? I think that's what this group is going to be thinking about in that first year of life.
Okay.
Yeah. Senator Brooks.
Thanks, Chair. Other than the reporting requirements, how does this differ greatly from what the DOPC does?
So this is a group whose whole primary purpose is going to be studying the wholesale market and bulk power system. So effectively the generation and transmission system for risk to our state, and thinking about, okay, what does that possible future of that market and that system look like? And are we comfortable with those futures, depending on how we are serving our state policy and meeting our needs? Mm-hmm. If you determine that, yes, you are comfortable with those futures, no additional action is necessary. But there's likely to be, if they catch something or there's something where they're like, well, this could happen or this could happen, you get everyone in a room, and then this was the stakeholder process that is envisioned after the report is formed to talk through, okay, you've identified these risks. Should we solve for them and how should we solve for them? And so this group is really primarily, so how they differ from OPC is that they're not a ratepayer advocate. I guess they're in an advocacy role for the state in general, but it's an independent neutral party for us looking at the bulk power system and the wholesale markets that we live in as a state and deciding, or basically trying to do studies to help us understand what are the risks of that market that we live in, and are we okay with those potential risks?
Okay. And secondly, I was looking at page 9, where at least one scenario that examines a least cost approach.
Yes.
Okay, with that examination, will there be any, say, position where we could force utility companies to utilize that, or?
So, yeah, so this is going to be focused, the models that we are talking about are not going to be as granular as distribution systems. They're going to be at the transmission level. So in order for these models to solve and give us answers, it's going to be directional in nature. So they're going to say, I think generally this was the cheapest solution that kind of solved in the model, but it won't, I can't give you an exact dollar figure from that model. Mm-hmm. But what it will tell you is if you were assuming certain things about assets at the distribution level, mm-hmm. That could give you an idea of what we should then do with the utilities. Because our utilities being just pure distribution utilities here, they might not be dealing with this, like the issues that we will be talking about. Some of what they do will, because we might talk about distributed energy resources, or we might be talking about demand-side management programs, in which case maybe that's a program. And help us suss through that, what we propose in the bill towards the end is basically once every 3 years after they have the report, they request us to have a joint hearing where we basically listen. We have a whole hearing dedicated to getting feedback on this and deciding, are there actions that the utilities should take? Mm-hmm. But this was to get away, I think, in the original bill, you had every individual utility filing an IRP, which was part of our big budget request in the bill. Mm-hmm. And we were like, you don't need individual IRPs from each utility in the state anymore. That's not the world we live in anymore. That would also lead to capital bias towards the utilities. So we were saying, let's back that up a little, have one joint look at this, and then decide, are there actions we should be taking with the utilities for any of the risk identified here?
So I guess we could probably extract some of the things that are in, like Senator Charkoudian's bill, that gets grid enhancement technologies, doing things like that to see, rather than building a new transmission line. Right. Yeah, so we can get more out of the existing.
Right, so yeah, this kind of a model would be able to say, let's assume we have X amount of transmission capability coming into the state. Right. Let's assume I increase it by X percentage, and we'll see how that solves. And is that a cheaper one than if I had built something to solve the load? And then after you they say, okay, improving transmission capabilities into the state looked cheaper. Now let's have a discussion about, is that a new line or is that GETS? Mm-hmm. And you might not get into that exact discussion within this model. You might be able to, but likely you're going to get more of the high level direction of where the solution could be. And then we'll have a process afterwards to debate what is the more exact solution at that point.
I see. Okay. All right. Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Any additional questions for Senator Hester, Mr. Baker, Devin? Okay, guys, what I'm thinking, because again, give me the hands. You got bill hearings too. Okay, this is what I'm going to propose, because we do have these voting lists. We got some bills that I'd like to take up. We could, if there's no controversy, maybe we could have a discussion about this bill. But how about if we break for just like 1 hour and see if you all can maybe go over and see if you can get on the get some of your bills out, and then we already have 3 people missing doing bill hearings across the street, so I really can't take a vote, but we do have the lists. We have another. So how about we come back tentatively and actually text me or Lamoria, send a message, like if you've got your bill hearings over, you're ready to come back, or you're still got a couple bills left. Let's just kind of keep track. I don't want to just blow the restaurant, so after.
For the audience. 3:15?
Yeah, so let's say 3:15, but if it turns out we don't have a quorum, we may have to bump it to 3:30. But see if you guys can use your juice level and get some of your bill hearings heard, and then come back here and we could do some voting. And then we'll have a committee dinner later, so, okay? 3:15 tentatively, but maybe have to be flexible here. Okay, thanks, guys.